My name is Joanne Cox-Darling. I'm a Methodist minister, and it's my pleasure to share with you a little bit of the theology of the digital space. Early in Mark's Gospel, Jesus is seen encountering people time after time, and he does three key things in each of these early encounters. He recognizes their humanity, whatever else is going on for them. Jesus connects with them in a meaningful, deep, soulful way. And thirdly, he finds a way to bless them and show them the divine love at the heart and centre of all things. He embodies or enables them to be embodied. He connects with them and enables them to be loved. Brené Brown, a contemporary sociologist, says that in order for a human being to come to full flourishing, to wholeheartedness, they need to be able to share their stories of vulnerability and shame so that they can become more courageous, more creative, more connected people in the life of the world. By sharing those stories that are from the midst of our brokenheartedness, not despite them, we are able to discover more about God's calling upon our lives, and we're able to discover more about the nature of God in our midst. We too can have the opportunity to become embodied, more aware of ourselves and our bodies and our purpose. We can become connected to the whole of creation, to other people and to God. And we can be loved by other people, but most importantly, loved by the divine too. These three principles are also at work in trauma studies. Those people that have been impacted by all sorts of difficult situations, from a global pandemic to a car wreck, need to have the opportunity to share their story in such a way that enables them to become present to their bodies, to be connected with other people, and potentially to the divine as well, and enables them to access their emotional core again. That may or may not be our experience at the present time, but it offers us something of a rich theological structure which underpins this sense of becoming wholehearted and flourishing, the very things that we're seeking to achieve in our supervision practice. The digital space is a very particular way of holding together the supervision conversation. It's about providing and creating and nurturing safe and sacred places by which our brokenheartedness and our vulnerability can be shared with another, held, and in the right place and time celebrated. The digital space is a particular experience, a particular way of being embodied towards each other, albeit through a screen, being connected, albeit through the World Wide Web, and being loved, albeit through the airwaves and by God's Spirit. So we began by looking at Mark chapter 2, because so much work on God's activity in the digital space has been created and is in the hands of those people who are so often being excluded and marginalised. Any work at the moment on what it is to be a church in the digital age relies on the work of people in the past few years who have been working hard at building community, because there are barriers that they face to being on site, face to face in a community or congregation. This can be for all sorts of reasons, through work commitments and childcare, to medication, to illness, to infirmity, all sorts of reasons why people can't access community in the way that tradition would normally expect us to. And yet, from within that often marginalised and vulnerable and somewhat disabling community, they have found ways to enable each other to be embodied, to be physically present with each other, albeit with a screen between them, to be connected with each other, and to find ways of worshipping God and being loved by God. And so too is the challenge of our digital supervision as well. The digital reminds us of what this radical, open-hearted inclusivity of the kingdom looks like. So we began with Mark chapter 2 because it reminds us that the task of supervision is one of co-creation. The paralysed person relied on their friends to take them up onto the roof in order to have their encounter with Jesus. Both the supervisor and the supervisee have a responsibility to journey together, to recognise each other's agency in the conversation, to make the very most of the space, even if the space is 15 inches square. We need collaborators to lead us to our own encounters with Jesus. And we began with Mark chapter 2 because it reminds us that this is hard work. For some of us, we are already, about half an hour into this session, and yet we're still trying to find our feet. The digital world is so alien and complicated. Our confidence is so low that we really don't know quite how to make the most of it. The paralysed man was led to the house where Jesus was present, and there were people all around. There were barriers to that encounter. And so my hope is, as we explore the digital space, we're also able to hold our own stories of vulnerability together, where we do find this a really hard space. And there will be some things that will work for you, and there will be some things that really don't, and that will go for your supervisees as well. We began with Mark chapter 2, because flourishing isn't a simple solution. Jesus forgave the sins of the person before they could then take their first steps and walk. Supervision, especially supervision in the digital space, reminds us to listen even harder to the few things that we're able to see together, whatever spaces we are in, not to jump quickly to a solution, but to listen more deeply to the soulful conversation that the Spirit is gently nudging us both towards. And the digital space holds us together in a very particular way that is different to being on site with somebody else, breathing the same air. It reminds us that God is a God of the transcendent, that God is God in his full nature, between the screen as well as present with us. And God is a God of great immanence, the power experienced in our own lives and in the safety and security of the places that we call home. The digital space reminds us that God is ultimately a God of mystery. And so, we as embodied and connected and loved people, hosting a space, a prayerful space for other people to discover for themselves that they too are embodied, connected and loved people of God. We are able to, in the digital space, host an opportunity for the full flourishing of another human being. Even as Brené Brown goes on to say, we have to wrestle hope to the ground in the expectation of discovering something new together. It doesn't have to be easy to be good and something of God's kingdom. So I hope in the digital space you are able to discover a little bit more of God's true nature, one which is inclusive, co-creative, vulnerable, transcendent and immanent. Perhaps wherever you find yourself in supervision, wherever God's Spirit invites you to that soulful presence together, may you grow in courage and creativity and confidence in your digital supervision from here on in.